Welcome to the Recovery Stories podcast, bringing you stories of hope, healing, and triumph over the bondage of addictions, mental health struggles, trauma, and dysfunctional family systems. Our courageous storytellers have chosen to live their journey out loud in order to show others that they don't have to suffer in silence. The stories you will hear are raw, real, and may involve graphic and triggering content. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's Rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or are ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. Or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name is Patrick Custer and I'm your host. We want to start off by reminding all of you to please comment, subscribe, rate, share, however you can support this podcast on the platform you access it from. We would greatly appreciate it. We produce this podcast as an outreach to the community and a hope to provide encouragement and support. And with that, it is December. December's upon us, and the theme of the month is something different than we've ever done. We're focusing on neurosurgical disorders, teaming up and collaborating with Nashville Neurosurgery to focus on survivors, people who've dealt with neurosurgical disorders and overcome them, and what their story holds. So, today, we're actually talking to one of the neurosurgeons, Dr. Stoev from Nashville Neurosurgery, who was the neurosurgeon for last week's story, Victoria Phillips. He is joining us and telling us a bit about his story and how it relates to hers. And it's a really, really interesting piece. So I'm excited for you all to join in and listen. Dr. Stoev, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And I'd just love to hear a little bit about first about your journey. What made you decide to get into neurosurgery?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Well, it was a long journey for me, probably longer than most people. I spent about 20 years in college altogether.
Wow.
Before I finished my neurosurgical career. I started off initially as a nurse, and then I went on to medical school. And before that, I did a lot of other things. And the reason for that was that my path was a little more convoluted than the average academician. I came by myself to America when I was 18 years old. So as soon as I, got my birthday, my 18th birthday, I basically came to the United States by myself, with the intention of getting the best education possible. And it was not as easy as I thought it would be, because I was on my own and it was difficult to find finances to, fund my schooling. And my parents, did not have the means to support me. Bulgaria was and still is a very poor country. So I had to work 3 jobs and going to school full time. And it took a long career path to end up where I am right now. But I ended up, doing all of this, and it took me a longer time because I had to do small stepping stones until I got to the place where I needed to be. So it wasn't a very direct path. But my interest in neurosurgery started early on because my brother was born with cerebral palsy, and I had kind of grown up in an environment where neurological disease affects the entire family, and I could see the impact it had not only on him but on the entire family. And I saw what my parents were willing to go through just to get a glimmer of hope of, making him better, including things that are not conventional and all the conventional medical treatments as well. So I developed a profound interest in neurological diseases, I guess, early on, you could say.
Wow. That's interesting. Not everybody can say that their career path has such a unique tie to their personal life. But what a special one that is for you. So, talking about overcoming adversity, there are some things that happened along the way that shouldn't have happened, and And so tell us about that.
Yeah,
And how.
certainly. Now, I grew up in communist Bulgaria, so I mean, my view of America was very, very kind of skewed. You know, we had a huge propaganda, and didn't really know much about the country. All I knew is that, you know, this is like the pinnacle of education. You know, people will get sort of the cutting edge technology and all of this, and that's what I wanted to do with my life. You know, if I was going to spend all these years on becoming a neurosurgeon, I wanted to be the best and train at the best place. Um, but I came when I was 18 with $1,000, and that's all I had. That's all my family could afford to give me, and that was actually the equivalent of a 3 lifetime savings. So my dad had to borrow money from every friend, every neighbor, everybody in the whole town, pitched in to send me to come here. So failure was not an option. I was not going to waste that chance, you know. And in my mind, I said I would rather die than go back. I mean, I was ready to do that. I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I was ready to die from starvation or whatever it was, then go back and admit defeat and put my whole family down into the hole, you know, because they had to sacrifice so much. I mean, I can't even tell you. This is a huge amount of money they had to put up for me to just come here. And I came here as an exchange student in high school. So high school is really nothing. I mean, that's just 1 year of high school.
Mhm.
And when I graduated high school, my visa was such that it only allowed me to stay for 1 year, just for my senior year in high school. And there was no possible way to change it. And I didn't know that it was so difficult to do so. And now I'm facing with the possibility of going back home. And I mean, I have nothing but a high school education at this point, and I put my family in a huge debt, you know, just to get a high school diploma. That
Yeah.
was not going to work for me. And so my high school wrote a petition for me, basically. The entire high school, I was a very good student. And I met with congressmen, I met with politicians, all kinds of people came in and talked to me and tried to, you know, help me with that whole public support behind me to change my status. And that was something that I'm not aware of ever happening, because that visa was explicitly very, very restrictive. And it said 1 year and that's it. You cannot stay and it cannot change. Finally, I got permission from the immigration to change my status, provided that I find a host family to basically take me in. Now, how am I going to find some host family if I'm just by myself? I don't know anybody.
Yeah.
So the school wrote an article in the newspaper about me, and then they said, you know, for most, actually exactly what the title was, it said, for most, the sky is the limit, but Ivan is reaching for the stars. I think that's what they
Wow.
said. It was a well put article. And
Yeah.
then two physicians, they were family, kind of elderly physicians who had retired already, um, contacted me, and they basically said, we would like to have an interview with you. And that was a week before I had to leave back. So everything happened at the last minute. And I sat down and talked to them, and I told them, look, you know, I can't pay rent. I mean, I have to save every penny for school, but I can do work. I mean, I can do your yard work. I can clean things. I can, you know, do anything that I'm physically capable of doing in exchange for staying with you. So, and then they said, okay, sure, you can do our yard work, and you don't have to pay us rent. I mean, they didn't know me. These are people that I just met, and they opened their house to me, and they have been um, some of those people that are living guardian angels. I mean, these folks are, you know, flesh and blood, but I tell you, they're, you know, incredibly helpful to launch me to where I am now.
Yeah.
And I stayed with them for years, and you know, I was going to school. But the other problem was that I had to pay out of state tuition, which is 3 times as much as the regular tuition, because
Wow.
I'm not a resident. I was just a visitor. So I went to my student counselor and I basically said, you know, I'm sorry, but I can't continue coming here because I just can't afford it. I was working 3 jobs, and basically there was not enough hours in the day to make up the money that I needed to pay, because most of these jobs were like dishwashing and, you know, stuff like that, you know, nothing really high end. And so something happened that has never happened in the history of that school. I met with the president, and he said, I will not be doing my job as an educator if I deny you that chance to get an education. And I know how hard you're working to get there. I'm going to waiver the out of state tuition for you. And that has
Wow.
never happened for a non resident ever that I'm aware of. So that made it a little bit more attainable for me to go to
Hmm.
school. And then I had to get one degree and then another degree and sort of work my way slowly through that. Then I run into a problem of I couldn't transfer to another university because I needed to prove that I have enough money to pay for a whole year of tuition to any major university that I wanted to transfer to, and I didn't have that. So, and there was no way for me to come up with that kind of money. So, it was just, I stayed in that junior college for like, I think it was about 6 or 7 years. I mean,
Wow.
it was a 2-year college. I was there for so long because I couldn't move, and I had to be a full-time student in order to stay. So
So
I
you
took
just
every
got lots of
I took every class that you can imagine. I took everything. I had so many credits that they couldn't transfer just a sliver of them when I went to a
wow.
university when I finally transferred. But so there were a lot of these issues where, I mean, during that one part where in the very beginning, I mean, I had no money for food, so I was basically I had vitamin deficiency from starvation. I basically had to go to the health department. I had to be put on supplements because I didn't have enough food to eat. I mean, I was
Wow.
working so much. I developed a neuropathy from a vitamin B6 deficiency, and um, and then I thought something was wrong with me because I lost dexterity in my hands and my hands were numb, and I was just really having this fog in my head. Um, and I basically survived on peanut butter and milk for like 2 years. Um, but anyway, so that was a rough one. But then I moved past that. I wanted to go to medical school. Everybody told me you cannot do it. And I even went to a medical school counselor and I said, what can I do to, I mean, I have good grades. Like, I mean, I was a 4.25 average. I was above 4.0 average. Like, I had grades, I had all the stuff. And I'm like, what else do I need to do? And the guy told me, well, if you're not a citizen, you will not be able to come to school because unless you have the money to pay up front, then it's not going to happen. Well, I certainly didn't have the money, but I said, I'm working and I can make it as I'm going. No, he basically said, you need to, just focus on something realistic. Don't waste your time with this stuff. Just, you know, and I went to nursing school because that'll give me a job that pays a little better than washing
Yeah.
dishes and kind of get my medical experience a little bit more. Um, so that's when I said I've gone into a very roundabout way to get where I needed to go. I mean, there were so
Yeah.
many diversions along the way. So I did that, but I was there was I'll tell you this. Sometimes the smallest pebble can change the course of a river. And I tell you that even one
Yes.
act of kindness, no matter how little it is, it can have such a downstream effect on you, on your life, that I cannot emphasize that enough. So even even a little gesture, the gesture for me was one of my anatomy and physiology professor told me, Ivan, you're smart enough to do this. You can go to medical school. I know a lot of people that are way dumber than you that go to medical school and they become doctors. You can do this. And she was the only one that actually pushed me to like even think about, because everybody has said no, this is you can't do this. It's not going to happen. And as a matter of fact, she was taking her son to University of South Florida to look at the medical program there, undergrad and all this stuff, because he wanted to be a doctor too. She took me on a trip along with them just to see
Wow.
the school, and she didn't ask me to pay for anything. She's like, we'll pay for your hotel, for your food and everything else, and we'll drive you there. And I saw the college and I was like, I'm in love with this place. I want to go here so bad. And I became obsessed. Like, I will just do anything to get there, no matter how hard it is. And now I had at least this drive, like, look, I'm going to go for it. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, I mean, I'm still going to go for it. And I was able to actually transfer there. I did my undergrad at University of South Florida, and started looking at med schools and stuff like that. But it was that act of kindness that she just basically said, "We're going there anyway. Come and tag along with us. I want you to see the school, kind of talk to some of the people there." And that gave me the hope that I needed to, you know, make me feel like it's actually a possible thing for me to do. Um, so and I was working on getting my citizenship at that time, and finally it was time to apply for medical schools. And University of Miami was the only school that basically took my word when I said my citizenship has been approved. I don't have it in my possession yet, but it is coming. And they basically said okay, and they took me in, and that allowed me to get student loans where I can actually pay for my school and everything else. Um, but yeah, I went to medical school in the University of Miami. So, and I graduated top of my class, and I actually got one of the highest board scores in the history of the medical school, which allowed me to move on to the next step, which is neurosurgery, because that's not an easy not an easy field to get into. It's very competitive.
I
Um,
can only imagine.
yeah, so there are only at most one to two spots in each program, and there's only so many programs, and there are hundreds of people that are applying. So that was a whole nother thing.
Wow.
But yeah, so I'm no stranger to adversity, but part of it is like you have to be here's what you when you're faced with a dilemma like that or a difficult situation, what you need to do is figure out what are you willing to pay for that. And I don't mean just by money, like effort, sacrificing. What are you willing to sacrifice to get to there? Nothing is impossible, but it all comes with a price, and you have to figure out what is your price. My price was I worked like crazy for so many years, and I had no life for a very, very big chunk where all my friends are partying, they're going, seeing movies and, having girlfriends and things like that. I didn't. I just studied and worked. That's all I did. And I didn't see my family for 12 years. And
Wow.
I lost that connection with them over that period of time. They had changed. I have changed. We have kind of grown apart. But that is the price that I had to pay. And I mean, it's a sacrifice that you have to make sometimes, and you just have to find out what is your price that you're willing to pay, and what are you willing to sacrifice. And you can do anything you want, and sometimes it may be a few stepping stones here and there, and just go in a roundabout way. If you really want it bad enough, you can do it.
Well, that's
Um,
right, and I think one of the best pieces of advice that you've given in our conversation is that the approach of going about the whole thing at once is never the answer. It's one step at a time, and don't worry about the step behind this one because you can't control that one. You can only control
Absolutely.
the one
Yeah,
that is right in
that's
front of you.
very true. Very true.
So with Victoria's case, I know she shared, and we kind of tabled some of the talking about the biological side of it because neither she or I had the education to deal with it. But right, so she had a tumor in her cerebellum and also Chiari malformation that was both found out, diagnosed at the same time, and like an emergency type of situation. And so I'm curious. Uh, Everybody's case is unique and different. How do you approach dealing with situations like that? With such delicate information, I feel like it's probably something that you have to do quite often. Deliver news of findings and say, hey, we got to put one foot in front of the other, and this is what we're doing. Where do you pull from to connect with your patients, in that moment of such sensitivity?
Well, you pull from a lot of mistakes, really. I mean, this is the greatest teacher is failure, and I've had plenty of those early in my career. You kind of find your niche eventually. You have to have these discussions, very frequently in our career, even early on in training. I mean, there are a lot of times where you have to deliver bad news to people, and you kind of gauge the response that you get from different ways of approaching that topic, and everybody finds their own comfort zone.
Hmm.
And there is no really easy one way to address every single problem. What we try to do is sort of gauge the person's response and their readiness to accept the news, and then you kind of deliver that in a way that you think would be most suited to that person. Victoria is a fighter. She she is stubborn, and she's got a very strong spirit. I mean, she's running triathlons, and she's just a really a tough lady. So my approach to her is just straight on, just tell her exactly the news of what we found out. Now her story is interesting because like I said, she was a very healthy person, and she was
Mhm.
living a very healthy lifestyle, and to end up with a brain tumor, I mean, it's not something you expect at her age. She's a young lady. It's got promising future and all of that. So um, the first thing is, you have to tell the patient what the problem is. Obviously, this is our responsibility as physicians. We owe it to the patient to do that. But the second thing is to know that you're going to take care of them. That yes, there is a problem, but we have solutions to these problems. If you just kind of leave him at the point of diagnosis, I mean, it's going to be very distressing for them to kind of deal with that information alone. So immediately, the next step that we would take is, I just tell her, we have discovered what the issue is. We know where the problem is. We can deal with it. And if you think about what I told her is that if you think about the long-term process, it's going to take many steps and many battles to get through all of that. You
Mhm.
have to think of one battle at a time, and that's how you win the big battles, is with small incremental victories. And what I told her is that the first and foremost important thing is to remove that tumor. That will set the pace for the rest of um, this game that we're playing. And in order for us to win it, we have to play it smart and use our resources wisely. So I told her, don't worry about step 2 and 3, the chemotherapy, radiation therapy. What's going to happen a year from now? What's going to happen a week from now? We don't need to burden ourselves with that. The first step is just focus on getting the surgery done, recovering from that. And it is difficult for us to do it. Naturally, we have the tendency to go 100 miles ahead and think about, am I going to be here next year? I mean, what am I going to do with my work, with my friends, my relationships, stuff. I mean, there's just so many things that um, make our lives complicated. And this is never occurring at an opportune time. It just always happens when you least expect it. And you don't have a choice. And what I told her also is, if you think about a game of cards, you have been dealt a hand of cards, and you have to play it. You don't have a choice. You're in the game, and we have to do it smart, and we have to really plan our moves very carefully. But let us worry about the things we need to worry, and you worry about the things that you have to do. So um, that's kind of how we approach that. And the first step was really to do the surgery as quickly as possible. And I think it was a weekend, as a matter of fact, when we did the
Yep.
surgery. And the reason for the urgency was she had a really large tumor in the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is the back of the brain that controls coordination, balance, and even the intonation of speech can be affected by that. The danger area is really what we call the posterior fossa. That's where the cerebellum is located. And it's a compartment of its own, and it's a very small compartment. So if you add something additional to that volume, it creates a problem with high pressure. And the dangerous part is it can obstruct the flow of fluid that comes out of the brain. The brain normally makes fluid, and the fluid gets reabsorbed. There are certain channels that conduct the fluid out of the brain. And when you start occluding those, you can die. And you can die very quickly from obstructive hydrocephalus. And that is a medical emergency.
Was that also being caused by the Chiari malformation? Was the Chiari malformation also affecting the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid flow?
That's a very good question. And the answer is yes. Now, is it the chicken or the egg? uh, Sometimes Chiari malformation can be caused by an additional volume in that posterior fossa because it's displacing the cerebellum down, and that's what really Chiari malformation is. Now, she could have had that prior to this tumor developing. The tumor certainly didn't make it better. It probably made it worse. So it probably exaggerated the appearance of the Chiari. But at any rate, we figured we'll fix everything at the same time and kind of take care of all of that since we're going to be there.
What is the
Um,
typical surgery? I just so happen to have two friends in my life that both had Chiari malformation in surgery to fix it over the past 5 years, and But anyway, I'm not aware of, and I'm sure probably the majority of our viewers and listeners aren't aware of either what Chiari malformation is and what it is that you do to fix it. But it's not that uncommon of malady.
You're correct. It occurs frequently, and most of the time we pick this up early in, sort of early childhood to late childhood. That's when people start having symptoms big enough that require them to have something done about that. It is a congenital malformation of people who are basically born with a small posterior fossa. So that volume of space that the cerebellum occupies is congenitally small. And as the cerebellum grows, it has no place to go but down into the spinal canal. And by doing so, it can obstruct the flow of fluid that we talked about before. And that can lead to severe headaches and some other symptoms too. Now, there are different levels of Chiari malformation, different amount of herniation into the spinal canal. And we measure how many millimeters that herniation is. And depending on that, we determine, how symptomatic or, how urgent it is to take care of it. There are some rare varieties of Chiari malformation. There's Chiari 2, Chiari 3. Those are associated with a lot of other congenital anomalies that are quite profound and very, very obvious. But the Chiari type 1 is the mildest one of them, and sometimes can go unnoticed. And we do see them sometimes in early adulthood where we have to do something about that. But these patients have had symptoms for a long time prior to having surgery done for that. And the surgery for that is to basically open up the posterior fossa and enlarge the very bottom part of it where it connects to the spinal canal. And that gives more space for the cerebellum to rest and prevents obstruction of the fluid. It allows the fluid to escape in a more natural fashion.
Gotcha. Which makes all the sense in the world of how you were able to do a 2-in-1 for the tumor removal. You're already in there. Just create some space. Did you end up, I think I remember her saying that in addition to the tumor removal that you had to take out some of the cerebellum as well?
Yes. There are different procedures for the Chiari malformation. There is Chiari decompression that is called bone-only decompression, where we just remove a portion of the bone and leave everything alone. It works well for pediatric patients because they have, it's just everything is more compliant there.
Mm-hmm.
There is also Chiari decompression with dural augmentation, which I did in her case, where we basically put a patch of tissue to expand the dura is the membrane covering the brain, to expand that membrane so we have more space of cerebrospinal fluid to escape. And then there is the third variety, which I prefer to do, and that's where we actually resect the portion of the cerebellum that is herniated down. Now, that portion is non-functional tissue. It doesn't have any real neurologic activity there that is contributing to anything significant. So you can take it out without any kind of problems. And by doing so, we give it even more space. So now we're decompressing, removing that non-functional tissue, doing the dural patch, and that's kind of the maximum amount of decompression you can really get. And that's what I ended up doing in her case. Now I had to be in that area anyway for the tumor, so it really adds a very little bit more of what I was normally going to do there anyways.
Yeah. Wow. So how did how did everything go? I mean, obviously she's here and she
Yeah.
when we're talking with her, she seems like she's doing well. But with that surgery, did everything go like you thought it was going to? And
it actually went better than I thought. And here is what really got me very nervous. And we did this emergently, basically on the weekend, because she was already obstructing the flow of fluid, and she was developing hydrocephalus already. She had increased in the amount of the volume of fluid in her ventricles, which are chambers of fluid in the brain. But the other thing that worried me is the tumor took about half of the entire cerebellum. I mean, this is a massive tumor, and I was pretty certain that she's going to have some major deficits after the surgery. The cerebellum is forgiving. You can do a lot of stuff to it, but you can't just take half of it off and not have any kind of problems. Well, she didn't have any problems, which is really, really a wonderful outcome, because I was able to remove the entire tumor, and yet she did not have any deficits. a little surprising again, because I was expecting her to have a lot of balance issues, but even on right after surgery, she was doing phenomenal. And I was very, very pleased with that. But the size of this tumor was absolutely enormous, very, very large tumor.
Wow. I can't help but reflect on how I think the right word I'm looking for is neuroplasticity of the brain is so dynamic. The way that it responds to, we never know that exactly what it's going to do.
I would say one thing to that. The human brain is the most complex organization of matter in the universe.
Mm.
It is such a privilege and such an honor to be able to operate on such a sophisticated computer that I cannot imagine doing anything that's more satisfying than that. And you're right, there is a lot of plasticity, there is a lot of reprogramming that can occur. And thank God for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do what we do, because, we are not really fixing anything. The brain does a lot of this reprogramming itself. We're just allowing it to do so. And basically, our role in medicine is to stay out of the way and help along as much as we can.
Sure.
But I
Absolutely.
can't take credit for that. Really, removing the tumor is just, obviously that's the thing that I did, but the outcome that she has that's all her and her brain sort of being able to cope with that aftermath.
Yeah. So in our podcast, we focus on all types of overcoming adversity, from trauma, both physical and mental, addictions, mental health, dysfunctional family systems, you name it. And we kind of come from the approach of how it all correlates to our mental health, right? And how we cope with it mentally and emotionally. And so what is your advice to people that have something going on that they don't know about, right? So let me step back for just a second. In mine and Victoria's case, we both talked about how we had symptoms and they kept getting like, oh, it's getting diagnosed as allergies, or, these weird headaches or this or that, and, you mentioned earlier how it's science, it's practice, it's all practice, because we're just perfected. You're all perfecting, on the skill and what have you. But when it comes to being consumers of medicine, we all have, I guess our responsibility and obligation is to, weigh the information that we're giving and also be good communicators with our medical providers. So what would your advice be to people in general who are experiencing oddities that they can't explain, and they feel like they're getting misdiagnosed, and they just feel like something's not right?
Well, I always tell even my patients that come to see me, you have to have a certain degree of comfort and confidence in your doctor. And if you don't feel that, then you go somewhere else. And I even tell people, I don't have a problem with you seeing a second or third opinion. I mean, this is something that nobody's going to care about you more than you yourself. Sometimes you just get the wrong feeling when you go see a physician. It just don't click, or you feel something's off, something doesn't quite feel right. It's okay. You don't have to have this person do your surgery or take care of you. You can just go see a second opinion. And likewise, sometimes I feel that I meet patients that for whatever reason, I just don't think I'm the right fit for them. And I will tell them that. I say, look, we need to have this huge amount of trust. I mean, you're putting your life in my hands. You need to trust me with that. And I need to trust you with what I'm going to do as well, and that you're going to follow through with what I have to do with you. And if you don't have this match, then it's not a good place to start. You just need to find that for you. Now, but you brought a very good question, and I don't necessarily have a good answer for that. I mean, when you go to a mechanic and you say my car doesn't run right, and he tells you need to change the doohickey and this and that and the other, and terms that maybe not all of us know, you trust that he's telling you the truth, and you say, okay. I mean, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't know what these things mean and what they do. And the same thing when you go to your physician, you're not understanding, most of these terms and how things work. You just really trust that, they're telling you the right thing. And but sometimes you just have to listen to your gut. And if things don't feel right, you need to get a second opinion. And you should never be afraid to do that. Oh, because if you might offend your doctor, or you might, he might get mad at you or something like that. It doesn't matter. It's not about him. It's about you. So, um, but yeah, no, I don't necessarily have a really great answer to that, because this is a very difficult topic. How do you
Mm,
know? I mean, obviously, you don't think that you have a brain tumor if you have a headache. I mean, the
right.
chances are that you don't. In those rare conditions where you actually have something wrong with you, that is such a small percentage of the number of patients that have similar symptoms, and there is nothing wrong with them.
Hmm.
So you don't want to be hypochondriac on one hand and think
Right.
every time you sneeze that you have something terribly wrong with you. Um, but yet on the other hand, you have to pay attention to your body, and if that problem is something that does not go away and it persists for more than a couple of weeks, then you should probably see a professional opinion about that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that especially in my case, it definitely was listening to my body and understanding that nothing, things weren't getting better, and having the trust enough to communicate with my provider regularly, that things weren't things weren't as they should be, and they were progressing, and there's if you don't have that good communication with your provider, like you said, it's you find somebody that you can feel comfortable with, because that's the only way. It's a teamwork effort, right? Like,
Absolutely. And I tell you, the disease is the great equalizer. I mean, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, how
mm,
famous you are, what's wrong, what other things are going on in your life. Suddenly everybody gets reduced to the same sort of level,
yeah.
and you're just a human being asking for help. And I mean, I've treated people that are homeless, and people that have nothing, and I've treated billionaires on top of that too. And it doesn't really matter. And then my approach to that is, you get reduced to this kind of essential being a human being at the end of the day. Um, and people that are highly educated and people that are not educated. I mean, when you're faced with some life-altering disease, it doesn't matter. All that stuff flies out of the window, and then you're just a person, a human being asking for help. And um, and that's another thing that I kind of enjoy doing is, basically anybody that walks through the doors, you're the same. It doesn't. There is no VIP. There is no, that term kind of rubs me off the wrong way when people say, "Oh, this is a VIP." Everybody's a VIP.
That's right.
Um, One thing I also wanted to mention about Victoria's case, and I don't know if she told you that, but she has an extremely rare brain tumor. And the problem with that brain tumor is that there's not a whole lot known about it.
Mm,
There have been only just a few cases like that in the literature, and there is not a very well established protocol in treating all of that. For example, one of the largest series published about this tumor is from Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital. They had 32 patients, which is a very large number that they collected over the course of a decade. So that's their cumulative experience over 10 years. They only had 32 patients with this
wow.
condition, and um, and that was like 20 years ago. Yeah, that was in 2000 or so. So that was 20 years ago they published this. There's some other small groups of patients from international studies and some other institutions, but the main difficult, and I've actually seen she's my second patient with this very rare condition. So you can say that, I've seen probably more of these than your average neurosurgeon, because one is too many, and having two patients like that, that's a huge number of people basically. But yeah, and this is actually a tumor that occurs in childhood. It's called medulloblastoma, and it is one of the most common tumors under the age of 5. It's about 25% of all the childhood tumors are this type of tumor under the age of 5. And it
Wow.
has a terrible prognosis in children. I mean, it's lethal universally. Like, they don't make it to adulthood. For adults, it's a little bit better. And for whatever reason, the histology, the biology of how this tumor behaves is more favorable when you see it in adults, but it's also very rare. So you can't really treat it the same way as you would treat uh, um, a pediatric patient, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, and these protocols are kind of a moving target a little bit because we don't have a lot of experience to really base it on. It's not like we have thousands of patients and we know this is the right way to do that. So this was really the difficulty that we're kind of running into with her care, is that it's such a rare entity that there is no one expert of dealing with this, and it has a very high rate of recurrence, and it's just a very difficult kind of problem to deal with. Now, fortunately, she is at a very great facility, and they're taking good care of her, and her and I stay in touch, and she kind of gives me updates of what's going on, and they're on top of it, and they're doing a very good job. I'm very impressed with them, and I feel very comfortable, and I can relax a little bit knowing that she's in good hands, because she's not in Nashville anymore. She's in Texas, so that's another challenge too when the patient is kind of so far away. But we're keeping in touch, and she's giving me updates and everything.
Yeah.
But that's another thing I wanted to mention, because this is a very unique sort of thing, and you're talking about overcoming adversity. This is a major adversity to overcome, and she's doing so far really well.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that she and I talked about is really with many of the types of adversity we cover on this show, this information, or I guess this way of approach would apply. But in mainstream society, especially here in the United States, we place so much focus on being busy, instant gratification. It may not be the same in the in the medical field, because you'll have to deal with mortality and death so much more. But I think in mainstream society, in the U.S., we don't. It's almost like we're averse to anything that focuses on our mortality, and the focus is on youthfulness, instant gratification, whatever makes us feel and look better now, and I think that we're approaching a better and more healthy spot as far as living in the moment, people embracing things like meditation, tools that bring us back to living and appreciating the day and time that we're in now. But I say all that leading up to say that one of the true gifts that both Victoria and I agreed were given to us through our experience, was that we were forced into this perspective that no one could have given us with words. The life experience has forced us into this place of a daily process of grounding and just taking each moment for what it is. And, perspective, because you could look at that, you could look at that completely negatively, or you could look at that, with a positive outlook.
Absolutely. And what I say oftentimes is that the most valuable thing in life is time. You can't buy it, you can't make it up. I mean, and living in the moment is something that is difficult to do, because we are trained, from, I guess, early on, like goal oriented. I mean, I'm trying to get to this finish line, and I tell you, one thing that I found in my life, becoming a neurosurgeon was a huge dream of mine. I mean, and I started working since the age of 18. It's kind of working towards getting there, and it took a very long time. I mean, it really took me a very long time. It was a very hard road with many roadblocks, and oftentimes I thought it's not going to happen. And everybody told me, you can't do it. You're an immigrant from another country. How are you going to pay for this school? I mean, it costs so much money. I mean, there's not enough work hours in the day to work to make up for that. But when I did accomplish that goal, when I graduated, and I got my degree and my specialty and all this stuff, all of a sudden there was just this weird sense of emptiness, because now what do I do now? I mean, I did it. I did what I wanted. I was working so hard to climb this mountain, And now I did climb it. And all of a sudden, you kind of almost felt like for a minute, like loss of purpose, for a minute, like where do I go from here? I've accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish in life now. I mean, this is it. This is my hugest battle that I wanted to win. And then you find another battle to fight, and then you just kind of focus on, well, now that I have this tool set, it's not just about me. Now I have a chance to affect other people's lives. And, and at the end of the day, what makes you a great person is not what you did for yourself. I mean, that's a natural tendency for us to do something for ourselves. Is how many lives you touch and how many people you affect through your work. And I think that's what makes a magnitude of a human being at the end of the day. Not only what I got a nice watch and a nice car. Okay, what does that make me a good person? Not really.
Right.
It's really all the other lives that you touch and you affect. So, but you're right. I didn't live in the moment for many years. I lived for the moment of me becoming a neurosurgeon. That was I was just so laser focused on that I mean, I went without food, I went without clothes, I went without all kinds of stuff because everything I did was just towards this one goal.
Mm.
And when you try so hard to get there, once you do get there, and then you realize, man, I missed out on all these years of just really thinking about this one moment that I missed all the other moments that passed me by. I mean, I didn't have a girlfriend until I was in my I think it's like 30s,
Yeah.
like I was just school and studying and work and all this stuff. And perhaps I missed out on some of those moments, but I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, I still got to where I wanted to be. Uh, but to second what you said, it's sometimes unnatural for us to kind of stop and take inventory of where we are and what's around us, and appreciate that moment. I've learned to do that. I've learned to do that a little bit later in life, but I think it is important for all of us to do that without having to be thrust by some massive
Right.
external force to drive you to, to these extremes of, dealing with a brain tumor or life and death. All of a sudden, you have to think, am I going to wake up from this surgery? Am I going to be okay after that? And you went through this.
Mm.
But we don't need to have such a massive event to force that perspective on us, like you had it for yourself and Victoria too, and many people do, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more that, we can learn from others and see these examples of real life. And one of the things that I love about doing this podcast, we're raising elevating stories and voices of hope of people that have gone through all these things. And people love to hear it because they're either going through the same thing or it provides them this window and access to connecting with somebody else's struggle is one of the most powerful things that forms of connection that we go through, because life is, as you mentioned earlier, full of adversity. And so when we can, I guess when we're open to approaching it from that positive angle, we can look at a story like mine or Victoria's, and let that affect our lives and kind of change and shape the way that we are taking advantage of, that finite time that we have here on this earth, and doing, I guess being more responsible with how we're using that with ourselves. And it all comes down to, internally, like what you were saying, me and Victoria and probably many other people are so grateful that you honed in on that period of your life. And, we're so dedicated, because who knows if you would have ended up doing what you're doing and being able to save lives. But at a certain point, your mental health comes down to, and well-being comes down to, you gotta, it's like kind of a checks and balances, or almost like a, your bank account, like there's a finite number there. And if you keep pulling from it, you're going to hit a balance of zero at some point. And we all, I think, hit that balance of zero. And for some of us, we get to that place where zero doesn't necessarily mean the end of the line. It means we have a second chance at reassessing and figuring out how we can do things differently. from that mental and emotional perspective. So I love that you drew that parallel in your own personal life, because that in and of itself is something that I truly hope that we can accomplish here today.
Yeah, no, it's very well put. You really said it well. That's exactly right.
Well, thanks. So gosh, I know we're just about out of time, and I really want to thank you for your time today. I just wanted to ask you if there's anything else, a word of encouragement or advice that you would like to give our audience today.
I think there are a few things. One is be grateful. I think having a sense of gratitude for those who help you and for the things that you have accomplished is very important, because that sort of mental inventory that you take in of where you are at this moment can be very helpful to ground you and to kind of allow you to uh, spend a little more time in the present and just kind of enjoy what's happening right now to you. But I have found that in my experience in my own life and other people that have gone through similar things where they've been met with a lot of adversities kind of growing up and dealing with a lot of stuff, is those who are grateful tend to go a lot further. And I don't know if it's just because other people are willing to help you more when they kind of sense that humanity of you, that you appreciate when somebody reaches out and gives you a hand. And there's no shame in doing that. It doesn't make you weak. It just makes you smart. No man is an island on his own. We all depend on each other for either physical or emotional support. And if you are grateful for the things that you accomplish and for the things that are given to you, then I think you're going to go a long way. And that's what I found in my formula of success, if you want to call it that. There were a lot of people that helped me along the way, and there were a lot of desperate times where, I didn't see a way out, and I didn't know how things are going to actually work out. I mean, there are so many barriers that, I had to deal with, unique to my situation of, coming as an immigrant and being a dishwasher. I mean, I was a dishwasher basically for, what I started, working when I came here. So, but there are people that help me, and I cherish that to this day, and I never forget it. And I think it makes me a better person, and it also gives them validation of what they did for me. It was an effort worthwhile because I didn't waste that opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well put. And my goodness, I can't appreciate or have more gratitude for for what you said. I have to end with saying this, and I joke about this with Dr. Franklin, or I did joke about this with Dr. Franklin. I think he's got a really great personality, and I think you do as well, and a great bedside manner, and the fact that just a great way of connecting with people. Neurosurgeons typically don't have the best reputation for being the most personable people. And so the fact that, I really feel like it's meant a lot to me, and it'll mean a lot to many other people, getting to hear your words and your perspective, because, we have people with this high intelligence level, and I'm not saying the rest of us are dumb, but there's a different way that y'all communicate and understand and everything. So thank you for taking time to share what you have in a way that is for regular people.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this very much. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Absolutely. Well, with that, thank you again. And thanks to all of our listeners. And we are out.
For more information on today's episode, check out the show notes. Recovery Stories is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health's rooted alumni community. If you or a loved one are struggling, have questions, or ready to take the next step, call our admission center at 888-648-4098. or visit us online at www.promisesbehavioralhealth.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. Whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please share with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. We are grateful for you and hope that you have been encouraged by today's episode. As always, remember you are only one decision away from a completely different life, and it is never too late to start loving yourself.